I was only a child when I first saw Krampus. My family had just immigrated to this country. We left every earthly possession behind, but the memories and stories of our homeland followed us on our journey. Once we arrived, we were immediately settled into the same ghetto that so many others from our Eastern European village had. A decrepit row of 4-storied slums along an alleyway that was more sewer than street. Our father, during the few hours that he was home from the mill, said that we would be better off here. But my sister and I missed the deep forests and high mountains that we'd play in only a short time ago. Even when I tried to imagine myself back home, my real home, the noise of the city always broke through my thoughts and brought me back to the alleyway. My mother tried her best to remind us of our old life, often as my sister and I were crawling into the bed that we shared. She would tell us the same stories she said that her mother had told her. Some of the stories were exciting, others made us laugh, but a few terrified us. The most awful story told of one who, until the deepest part of winter, would kidnap naughty children. We shuddered as she told us of how it would torment children just like us. In a desperate attempt to get her to stop, we'd pretend to fall asleep. But she always finished the story. Our father would often tell her to not fill our heads with such horrible things, that some tales from our homeland should remain there. Mother, though, would shake her head and quietly insist that it was dangerous to forget where we came from. Our lives continued like this for the next several months. I had believed that I would eventually come to see our forgotten alleyway as home, but its sense of foreignness persisted. In fact, it felt as though hardly anything had changed since we arrived. Our lives had never improved nor gotten worse, and I still felt like an unwanted stranger in my own neighborhood. The only thing that had changed was my behavior. My sister and I had begun to get into trouble more often. We never meant to hurt anyone. It was just that we had so little, and sometimes we had to steal if we wanted to eat that day. Usually our misdeeds were my sister's ideas, and I followed along. I guess one always looks up to their older sibling. I never believed that our petty crimes would have serious consequences. But looking back now, I can see that we were walking blindly down a dark path. I can remember when things took an ominous turn. Ever since All Saints' Day, our mother had been warning us to be good little girls. She pleaded with us to stop our bad behavior. I remember her crying a lot. Early in December, my sister got caught stealing a piece of fruit, and I thought my mother's heart would break. She began to shake and pulled her rosary beads out from her pocket. For the rest of the night, she clutched the beads tightly and desperately repeated her prayers. When I finally asked her what was wrong, she paused just long enough to glance at the window and hissed, "He knows. He knows. It might be too late." I didn't know what she meant, but I was scared. My sister didn't seem to care, though. The days passed and the temperature dropped. It was the night before Christmas, and snow had begun to fall. The heating had already gone out several times, and the flickering lights threatened to go out as well. As we would attend the sunrise the next morning, my father told my sister to go bathe. Suddenly my mother began shrieking for us to not be alone. I heard my father quickly move towards her and began trying to comfort her with his deep, soft voice. She quieted down some, but still She insisted that we not be alone. My father told us to take our baths quickly, then join them. As we headed down the hallway towards the washroom, my sister sprinted ahead of me and stood in the doorway. "I'll go first," she said. "I won't be long." She laughed. I stomped my foot but said nothing as the door closed. On the best days, there was barely enough warm water for everyone in our house to bathe. With the heat going out, there was likely only enough warm water for a single bath. My sister knew this. I heard her draw the water, and then began singing softly to herself as she dipped into the water. After a few minutes, the singing had stopped, and I began to fear that she had fallen asleep in the tub. Then I heard a noise. A sharp, clacking noise. Like someone wearing wooden shoes. It was slow, but deliberate. Almost like it was sneaking up on something. I knocked on the door, and the clacking had stopped. No answer. I assumed that my sister was just ignoring me, or possibly trying to irritate me, as she often did. Then the noise began again. This time, even slower. I pressed my ear to the door and held my breath. Once again, the clacking noise had stopped. But I could now hear a light tinkling sound, like the chime of 100 bells playing in the distance. I listened until I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard a soft splash. She hadn't fallen asleep. She was playing a game, waiting to see how long I would stand out here in the cold hallway, while she turned her fingers and toes into warm prunes. I knocked again, louder this time, but still no answer. I was quite frustrated and cold by this time, and so, without another knock, I swung open the door and stepped inside. As I did, the power in our building went out. The hallway behind me was plunged into total darkness, and I heard my mother in the distance give a cry of fright. I blinked my eyes a few times. The small heater in the corner of the washroom cast an eerie orange glow across the room. Feeling my way until my eyes adjusted, I stepped around the curtain at the end of the tub and began to scold my sister for taking so long. Then I saw it. It was standing beside the tub. Though it was hunched over, it must have stood nearly 7 feet tall, with its horns adding another foot or so. Coarse, black fur, like the pelt of a goat covering its body. It had powerful legs that ended in hooves. The source of the clicking noise, a thick tail whipped around in the air behind it like a cobra, circling its prey. Heavy chains wrapped around its muscular shoulders and torso as it inhaled and exhaled. The chains produced their bell-like chimes, yellowed eyes that burned with a smoldering rage stared down from its twisted nose. A wheezing, bubbling sort of breath passed between its fangs and incisors that extended so far from its molted gums that I don't believe that it could possibly close its mouth completely. A long, pointed, slimy tongue hung down past its scarred and disfigured chin like some sort of grotesque dog, and thick globs of spittle collected at the corners of its mouth. One of these globs broke free and fell into the tub. I looked down and saw that its hands were long and hairless. Each finger ended in a sharp nail and was wrapped in the same kind of corpulent skin as a vulture's bald head, the result of too much exposure to rotten flesh. I then noticed the thin wisps of hair floating between its fingers. My sister's hair. The beast was holding her head under the water. I screamed. Only at this point did it take a look at me. It was not alarmed by my presence, but rather, it seemed almost whimsically bemused. As if I were asking it a riddle that it already knew the answer to. Looking directly at me, it stood up to its full height, its horns now brushing against the ceiling as it stood up and lifted my sister out of the water. My screams were caught in my throat, and I began to choke. It held her with a single hand. Each of its 5 sharp nails had pierced completely through her body. Strangely, the only coherent thought that had passed through my mind at the moment was the hope that my sister had already drowned and could not feel the pain that the beast was inflicting on her. The Krampus took a step towards me and gave me a dry, shrill laugh that sounded like an animal being strangled. It held my sister out, as if it were cruelly offering her body to me. Then we both heard the footsteps in the hallway. My parents were running to see what was the matter. The beast quickly wrapped its heavy chains around my sister's lifeless body and cinched her to its back. Then, with surprising agility, it threw open the window and leapt onto the narrow ledge. It balanced there for a moment, then turned to look at me one last time. Our eyes met in that moment, and it burned the full horror of itself into my soul. Then it leapt from the ledge and disappeared. My parents were already in the washroom before I realized that the beast was gone. They held me tight and began to ask what the matter was. I couldn't even speak, but only pointed towards the tub and then the window. My mother was the first to notice that my sister's clothes were lying by the tub and instantly ran to the open window. I heard her scream curses in our old language at the darkness. Then she collapsed, and my father ran to her begging for someone to tell him what was going on. My mother was near to fainting and could only point to the hoof-like print in the snow upon the ledge and speak a single word. Krampus. I don't remember much after that, but 4 days later, my sister's body was found by a sewer grate. There was no investigation, no arrests made. To this society, she was just another dead immigrant child, no different in their eyes than a drowned sewer rat. Not that it mattered much. No manhunt would never turn up that creature, which was not even a man. I am old now. Over the years, I've seen all of my friends from that hellish ghetto die, some of them in horrible accidents, yet I've always found some measure of peace with every one of their deaths. I do realize that death is inevitable, but there is one fact that keeps me from finding peace with my sister's death. When the police officer came to visit my family, he said that my sister had only been dead an hour before they found her body.